Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Good morning. Good morning. This is David Parra, and this is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, with an important show today. Very, very important, I would add. It's called The VA, Its History, Benefits, and Resources. VA, Its History, Benefits, and Resources. And I believe that when you talk about veterans, the whole country listens. It's just a word very loaded with a lot of sentiment, I believe. And first of all, I want to thank the three of our guests today. Thank you for your service. It's unbelievable. Let me introduce them briefly. We have to my right Robert Hernandez, and Robert is a historian of both the American Legion Arizona Department and the American Legion Post 41. So you are a historian, and you're also the past commander of American Legion Post 41.
Correct.
Welcome, and thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Then we have to my immediate left, Ben Carrillo. Ben Carrillo is the current commander of American Legion Arizona Department District 12. And you are also the PR representative of the American Legion Arizona Department.
Correct.
Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we also have Angel Juarez. And Angel is the state adjutant.
Adjutant. You got it.
Adjutant.
Right. Yes,
Of the American Legion Arizona Department.
yes, sir.
And we'll get into about this American Legion, American Department districts, and all that kind of good stuff. I think it's important to understand. But first of all, I want to say one more time, thank you for your service, and welcome to our show. Let's start the conversation with, let me read something that I typed. This is just kind of like a comment, a concept that I would say conceived while doing a little bit of research this week. To study the VA is to study history. To study the VA is to study wars. To study the VA is to study the U.S. government, is to study legislation. To study the VA is to study how the country became what it is today. To study the VA is to see how the veterans were the greatest or are the greatest contributors to what the country is today. I suppose in history, there's always a challenge, right? When it comes to veterans, sometimes there's a lot of support. There's sometimes that it's not enough support. So there's history tells us we've always kind of gone back and forth. So let's talk a little bit about, before I ask you some questions, I also want to say that President Abraham Lincoln said these words, to care for those who shall have borne the battle, and for their widow and their orphan.
Sure.
These are words by President Lincoln, and I understand that these were adopted as the motto, M-O-T-T-O, the motto of the VA. Am I correct?
I personally was in the U.S. Air Force. I spent 34 years. I was a Vietnam veteran as well as a Desert Storm veteran because of the tenure of years. Angel?
I was Army, in the Army Guard, 6 years total time. It's a unique experience because as we do our Army mission, we rely on the Air Force and the Navy to get us where we got to be. So whether it's wartime or peacetime, that's a constant mission there. So,
Yeah. Ben?
Ben Carrillo. I served 20-plus years in the United States Marine Corps. During my service, the conflicts that were part of the U.S. Were Grenada, Panama, and then, of course, the first Gulf War, which was right after, which was the first war after the Vietnam era.
Thank you. I believe it's clear that the VA has become a symbol of an entity that serves those who have served their country. And we understand that a VA hasn't always been called the VA, right?
Yes.
I believe it was, that started in 1930. Am I correct on that? 1930, I believe it started the VA as such. And
Yes.
I believe so. But the concept, I believe, irrespective of time, one thinks of the VA as that entity that is supposed to support the veterans. Can we go over just briefly how we got here, how this all started in terms of the battles or difficulties this country has gone through from the very, very beginning, and just maybe make a brief mention of the major conflicts that this country has had to endure and fight.
Okay. If I might start, because of the Army being the oldest, I think it's fair to say that when people come together, of course, they come together for mutual protection of sorts and mutual prosperity. That safety requires, somebody in the community taking care of, safety, and then somebody on the wall to protect them against, other people's. And so armies formed, and then as we come forward into time, the branches, if you will, that formed by necessity of the different kind of warfare that we fought. But I think that each of the peoples that has an army or has branches of military understand that they're there for our protection, and so there's that responsibility understood that for those who return, that there would be some appreciation and some ability to say thank you for what they have done for the mutual good. So going back to those early periods, even back, and you'll find it in histories about the Veterans Administration because of what it is made up of many departments, but many of those departments were specialized bureaus that were being formed. Ultimately, the government, in trying to centralize its ability, brought those together to what we have now with the modern Veterans Administration, which then, of course, is going to shift with what it needs to take care of and how many based on the wars, beginning with World War I and the survivors there, as well as those survivors with major injuries to which we did not have governmental programs at the time. They were out in the community. And so all these things formed coming forward, so we were much better with World War II. However, we'd already learned some lessons as well. And with World War II, because the Veterans Administration had begun, it also really started going into major division where it's actually two government bodies, if you will, the medical benefits by the hospital section, and then all the other benefits under the regional benefit offices around the country and maybe some parts of the world. I've got to find out where those other ones are. But as they came forward into the era for the Korean War, we started to see the differences in what the community was seeing because of how it was referred to before as it's referred to as the Forgotten War because there was a time when it wasn't a war, and then come forward to the ways that the Vietnam War were looked at differently, and we started to see people come to different sides of understanding about the veteran and what that person did for the country. We started to learn that you cannot separate the warrior from the war. So to create conflict and discussion around the war and why we're doing it, it creates a problem for some of the veterans that we see even today from our Vietnam era warriors who are tremendously active in preventing what was done to them. In terms of those confusions in our country at the time, they have been an integral part as individuals and as groups, and whether they're part of our organization, the American Legion, or whether as individuals, you'll see them all the time doing something to make sure that our modern-day warriors are not treated the way some of previous warriors were treated.
A big responsibility by government, right, to commit to a war because you're putting at risk people's lives, but then you also have to make provisions so that when these veterans come back to join society once again, there's all kinds of needs that need to be addressed. So, right. and it's a big undertaking, a big planning, if you will, and that's where I believe some of the funding perhaps sometimes is adequate, sometimes not so adequate. But my point is, big decision too when the government decides to go to war. Can we mention just real brief? I know that the colonial times people had to fight, and then the government had to provide some money for the disabled veterans. Then we come to the Continental Congress in the 1700s. Then Congress basically started to provide, services and resources for those that fought. Then you have the Civil War. The Civil War came, and that's the time of Abraham Lincoln. That's when he said those famous words, right? And after the Civil War, you have the World War I, and then the Great Depression hit, and then you have, that's when the Veterans Administration during that time was initiated in 1930 by an executive order. Then you have the World War II, and then you have the Korean War, then you have the Vietnam War, and then you have the Vietnam, and then you have the Persian Gulf War. Please.
We're still in the Middle East in two different platforms, so we're actually fighting two wars simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And of course, other conflicts that are actually surrounding us right now, where we have Americans, what we call boots on ground. But those are right now. Those are not actual committed wars. Those are areas where we have sent Americans to either help the country or provide some type of training for them. Mm-hmm. So I think right now the U.S. is in its biggest state of conflict than they've ever been. Compared to World War I, World War II, Vietnam, mm-hmm. And the first Gulf War. We didn't anticipate being in this heavy of conflict mm-hmm.
as
we are today. And that's where the VA, as you had mentioned prior to, that funding and programs available, that they just didn't see it. Mm-hmm. And now that we're involved and we're in the middle of it, each time a veteran comes back, there's something new. There may, and we're still working on the first Gulf War and Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My father was a 20-year Marine, and he was Korea and Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And even before he passed away, they still had not resolved some of the issues that were involved with chemical exposures or other, like today we talk a lot about PTSD. Mm-hmm. That's another program which is now very big that we're struggling with. Mm-hmm.
Many challenges when people come back, correct?
Every day, because every depending on the region where they're coming from, there's different exposures. There's different types of weaponry used against us. So when an individual that's out there in this conflict returns, they may have different ailments, which now is new to the VA. Now we have to kind of capture what is it, how are we going to treat this.
And government has to step up real quick, right, to provide funding for that, because that's something new.
Well, yeah, they're always going to have a funding issue,
right,
because you just don't know what you're coming up against.
Right.
You don't know it until they start returning. If you look back a year ago, all you heard was PTSD, but they never talked about the individuals coming back that were needing prosthetics.
Right.
But now they're heavily working into the prosthetics because these people want their normal life back. So, is it the old plastic style prosthetic or is it the metal?
Right.
I mean, there's different things that are coming around, and science is working, but you have to have a budget. If you don't have that budget, then we're going to miss out.
Yeah. We have to go on our first break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Today's title, The VA, Its History, Benefits, and Resources. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, the VA, its history, benefits, and resources. Let's continue with our conversation. We have three amazing guests today. They are all veterans. They all have served in different branches. You know, as I was doing a little bit of research this week, after World War I, the Great Depression hit. Then after World War II, the GI Bill was passed, which, according to the research that I did, it literally produced the middle class. That really caught my attention. How World War I ends up it's followed by a Great Depression, but World War II is followed by the so-called American dream by thousands of people, if not millions. What is the GI Bill? Why did that have such an amazing impact in the economy of the country, education, housing? It literally changed the concept of the American dream in America.
I think it's important that we remember that members of the military are first members of a community who are drawn away to serve and to defend the country and its interests. When we come back, we're still members of our community who happen to be veterans now. The GI Bill was, I believe, a direct result of lessons learned from things, the missteps and the delays that we saw after World War I. And so when you think about the machinery that kicked into gear to help support the World War I effort, then you come back and those industries aren't needed as much, then it takes away many more people coming back at once looking for work, all those kinds of things that contributed. But the GI Bill, as it was presented, created an opportunity for us as a community to focus the effort of providing for the veteran status. You know, instead of just here's you can go home now, you're done with the war, here's your uniform, a couple of bucks, and be on your way, thank you for your service. It became integral to that person's next chapter of their life. And so when they go to their community now, it became the resource individually for them to be able to do the things that form the middle class, like you described.
Somebody had to think about it, and whoever did, that was an amazing concept of investment in the military, personnel who had come back. I was talking to my wife, when millions go to war, there's lots of when there's a war, there's lots of jobs, because now you have to produce a lot of the items that are needed for war. But then once the war is over, those jobs are pretty much gone. So now you can suffer a depression if you don't plan it well. But it seems like with the GI Bill, they did an amazing planning, an amazing concept to invest millions and millions of dollars to provide, was it free education, medical, housing? What were some of the things? Yeah.
The GI Bill itself was mainly formed for as a rehabilitation form to rejuvenate those coming back from a combat situation, bringing them back into the community, providing them with a resource to educate themselves into the current economy. So if you remember, going back to, we'll just utilize the Vietnam era. Most of those individuals that left were during the draft. So they were some of them were just graduating from high school. Some never even graduated from high school. So they really had no occupational experience or any kind of technical experience. So when they came back, this was a source to kind of help them rehabilitate them and get them back into the community. So that was what the GI Bill was actually set up for. But the other benefits provided to them were like medical. As we discussed a little bit earlier, we talked about the reasoning behind VA to provide medical and the different situations that we're in today with the Iraqi and Afghanistan war. We discussed it, two different theaters at the same time, but different medical issues that are coming back. So we weren't ready for it. Vietnam era, we're still battling that. In Persian Gulf, we're still battling that. But when you put these people into the military, there are promises that the U.S. made to us. And one of them, based off of as a VA benefit, is VA loans. Is which one of them that you had asked about. I just sold a home last week, and I'm currently seeking to buy a home. So once again, I'm utilizing my VA benefit.
The home that you sold, you purchased with a benefit from
VA
of the GI
benefit, right?
Great.
And so I'm now getting ready to utilize it again, and I'm sure all three of us have utilized that particular benefit. And this is a benefit for all military service members that have been honorably discharged. The GI Bill, when it was enacted, I believe it was after World War II. Okay, so all those, once again, it goes back that were honorably discharged.
Right.
And I'm not sure how it was in World War II. I wasn't even born then, but I can tell you during my era, we had to pay into it. So I paid, I think they took out like $15 a payday or a pay period. And then once I completed my time in service, when I got out, they would pay 50% of your education, and you would utilize the monies that you put into the system. And that's how you paid for your college.
So it was not 100% free. It was more 50-50, but then the 50 that you had to contribute was more of a withholding that they did on.
Yeah, it was a withholding, but actually I think they actually paid 75%.
Okay.
So I utilized different educational benefits, but we can talk about that here in a bit.
The difficulty comes in, I think, in that the complexities, whether it's branch related or whether it's individual to the warrior, and then you become a veteran when you leave. I'd like to make sure that your listeners understand that it's more important for someone who has served in the military to see themselves as a veteran. A great many times, if we weren't in a combat situation because of the role we played, they don't see themselves as veterans. And so better to say, talk to a local counselor at the Veterans Administration in one of their offices, come to an American Legion post, come to any veteran service organization who can sit down, look at your documents, and help you understand exactly what you're eligible for. Because, again, like Ben mentioned, the era determined what parts are automatic, how much is automatic. But a final thought on that, frankly, the veteran is a veteran because whether we paid into a benefit like that or not, we paid in with time, sacrifice, blood, sweat, and tears. So that's important.
And I was doing, again, a little bit of research, and I learned that some celebrities and even presidents of the United States went to school with money from the GI Bill. Yeah. So that's how powerful it was. Anything to add on that, Robert, on the GI Bill?
Well, I don't recall there being a deduction on mine when I came out during the Vietnam era, but I did utilize it, and I was paid an amount that was equivalent to my family, whether I was married, how many kids I had, and I attended college, and I was able to do that. It was very beneficial. But I did not register at the time for the VA. It wasn't until later on that I spoke to my fellow veterans that convinced me I need to do that. And I went down and found out a whole lot of other things that I was unaware of at the time.
Yeah. Let me read just a short paragraph, and then we'll continue with your comments. I have here, it says, let me find it real quick. The bill, the GI Bill, dramatically transformed the concept of veterans' benefits, which was signed into law by President Roosevelt on June 22. There were three key provisions. The first benefit provided up to 4 years of education or training. The education package included the payment of up to $500 a school year for tuition, fees, books, and supplies, plus a monthly subsistence allowance. Again, this is President Franklin D. Roosevelt who signed this GI Bill. The second benefit provided veterans with a federally guaranteed home, farm, and business loans with no down payment. This feature was designed to generate jobs in the housing industry while providing housing and assistance for veterans and their families. And the third feature was unemployment compensation. Let me just finish this other sentence. The GI Bill transformed the economy and society of the United States. The dreams of higher education and home ownership became realities for millions of veterans and their families. The GI Bill contributed more than any other program in history to the welfare of veterans and their families and to the growth of the nation's economy. Again, I have to come back to the concept of after World War I, the Depression hit. After World War II, the GI Bill was enacted, and this is the product. Totally two different scenarios, where one, there was not a GI Bill, so to speak, and the other one made it possible for, I understand that they were expecting a few 100,000 veterans to take advantage of these programs, and it ended up being millions. I don't recall if it was it was around 4 to 6 million people ended up taking advantage of these benefits, and they only thought, education, they're not going to care for education, or they were wrong. Millions of veterans took advantage of these benefits, and again, it created an amazing result in literally producing the middle class.
I think we need to also look at what percentage of the whole population that can actually call themselves a veteran and take the benefits and utilize them. What is it, 2%?
1 to 2, somewhere between 1 and 2%.
We're a very small group. I did not understand that for the longest time because I see veterans all the time. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the environment I'm in.
Right.
And if you take a look, there's a small percentage. So those benefits that came out benefited the United States because we became productive.
Right.
We became able to fill some of those positions that they were hurting.
So the philosophy changed. I think you said, Commander Ben, that instead of saying, here's your money for having served, bye-bye, they invested on veterans,
right.
And that was the difference.
Absolutely.
Right. So, amazing change.
So earlier you had asked me about the GI Bill, and I kind of briefly told you on my era how the GI Bill benefited me. But in reality, when I retired from the military, I was a disabled veteran. And there's another program, and there's called Vocational Rehabilitation Program. Mm-hmm. And this is one that they sent me to any university here in the state of Arizona that I wished to go to. And their whole goal was to re-educate me into the society and get me back to be employable. Mm. And both myself and my wife went through this program, in which VA sent us to school. I went to a 4-year university. I received my bachelor's degree at that time. They paid 100% of it.
Wow.
Provided me all my books and actually a brand new computer because ours was antiquated.
You're a living example, Commander Ben.
Perfect.
Amazing.
And they actually paid me a monthly salary to go to school.
Wow.
And then found us a job thereafter.
I'm sure that feels good, and having served, that you feel appreciated. And I assume,
definitely. That's a benefit that
great.
It's out there that a lot of people don't even use.
Yeah. We have to go on our second break. You're listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection with an amazing subject today, the VA, its history, benefits, and resources. And we have great guests today, Robert Hernandez, which you're a historian and a commander. Angel Juarez, you are a state, let me try it again, adjutant? Yes. and this is with the American Legion. And we're going to take a little bit of time to explain the difference between the different entities that serve veterans, one being and one of the largest, the American Legion. We'll get to that. We also have Ben Carrillo. You are a District 12 commander. And, in reaching out to you this week, we were going back and forth through emails and kind of getting this show together. And we had a really hard time finding a female veteran. And I wanted to ask you, what's up with that? And can you tell us about women in the military in terms of from a historical context? And then bring us to the present.
If I may, David, Ben is probably the perfect person to help us with this morning. Going back to the topic about the GI Bill, the men and women, after World War I, the men and women in their advocacy for their fellow veterans, I think is what was a part of helping form that conversation, the dialogue, the legislation, getting the word to our leaders. And I say men and women because women have been serving in sometimes many unknown roles. And earlier, Commander Ben mentioned the benefits he enjoyed, and with he and his wife. And an important thing to highlight here, I think, is that Ben's wife is an Air Force veteran as well.
Wow. Great. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you. The history of women in the military was always known to be of administrative or in the medical field.
Right.
Correct. Because at one time, everybody knows this, that the U.S. always thought that, military is for men.
Right.
And the women have proven them incorrect.
Right.
As time went on and the years went on, women started to be a little bit more active in wanting to serve in roles same as men, and rightfully so. I can remember in the late 80s, I was stationed in El Toro, California, and the first women unit that was brought into the Marine Corps as in a combat unit, two of them came into my company at that time. It was rough because one, I had to adapt. I was a senior enlisted in charge, and they were under my charge. I had to adapt, and I had to get everybody else to understand and adapt with them. So a lot of changes in there. My wife is a retired Air Force, and she actually went to the University of Arizona and found that the college life and regular life wasn't something that she wanted to do, so she joined the Air Force. And she was in a combat field also. She served as a logistics, they didn't call them logistics officers, but she was a logistical technician, I believe is what they called them, where she helped load aircraft. She was the one that maintained and organized the loading of each different type of aircraft. And also she served in the capacity of a squadrons of fighter aircraft. She was in charge of deploying those units. So she logistically had to stand up a unit, ensure that all their gear is prepared, boxed, and ready to be shipped to the region that they're going to in order to conduct their duties. She also, as mentioned earlier, took advantage of the Voc Rehab program. She was a disabled veteran during her time. She took advantage of continuing her education and actually finishing.
What's her name?
Sandra Sandoval.
Sandra. Perfect. Well, we should have her on the show next time. Yeah. Let's move to the incentives. Why? I mean, I asked you earlier, and you are all of Mexican descent, correct? I assume U.S. citizens of Mexican parents? All three of you?
Second generation.
Second generation. You're...
Oh, I couldn't even tell you.
Okay.
They're territorial, so.
Oh, how about you?
I'm second generation.
Second generation. So, what is the incentive? I mean, what is is there pride, family tradition, benefits? What are the incentives for joining the military service?
I come from a long history of military personnel in my family, Army and Marine Corps. My father was a retired Marine, as mentioned before, but that isn't the reason why I joined the Marine Corps. When I was going to high school, I lived right next door to one of the largest Air Force bases in the United States, Davis-Monthan, over in Tucson, Arizona. And all my friends, their parents were Air Force. It just so happened that my father loved the area. He was from Tucson. When he retired, he moved us in that area. And he always talked to us, about joining the military or going to college. His pet peeve was rather us go to receive an education than go in the military. But I knew that I wasn't college bound at that time. I was having too much fun. But at the same time, I knew that I needed to do something to make myself employable in the future. But I also looked at the benefits that not only my father was receiving, but all my friends' parents that were retiring from the Air Force, what they were receiving. So I wanted to make sure that I was part of that group. But I wasn't going to make the military a career. I only wanted to go in for 4 years, receive some type of training. But I decided on being a Marine only because I was the type of person that always wanted to be challenged. And I knew that they had one of the roughest recruit training. And it was kind of not only to prove to myself, but to prove my father I can do the same. So, yeah, there is a little bit of, that family.
A little
ties
bit of
right there.
both.
Right. But I did it, and, it was a great career.
Great.
4
So-
years turned into 20 years.
So people can start not really knowing whether they're going to make a career out of it, and then eventually they can.
I had no clue.
Got it.
I just know that I wanted to join, learn something. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see things, and I wanted to make my own money without ever having to depend on my parents or anybody else.
Right. Anyone else? Pride, family tradition, benefits. What are the incentives?
Well, I also come from a strong family tradition in the military army. My uncle fought against the Japanese. My dad fought against the German. No, the other way around. My dad fought against the Japanese. My uncle, his brother, fought against the Germans. And I have Marines and Army in the family. But the reason I joined is because I told the judge that's what I was going to do.
Okay.
I did in fact have a scholarship. I was one of those that just didn't have any direction at the time. I got an athletic scholarship to NAU, which was ASC at the time. They couldn't honor the scholarship because they couldn't get a coach, so I came out. Got together with my buddies, ended up in court, and decided, no, I need to change. So I went in, and I don't even know why I got in the Air Force. I just went down. The first recruiter I saw, I got in. Well, I went in and put in my 4 years during Vietnam, got out, and I missed working on aircrafts. So I joined the Air Guard down here at Scar Harbor and put 30 years there.
Wow.
So I retired with 34 years as a jet engine mechanic, and it led me to be able to also get a job with the federal government, and I retired from there with 30 years as well.
So if somebody wants to, there are opportunities available, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, how about you? What was your incentive?
So I think in my mind, I always knew I was going to serve. All my uncles had served. My grandfather served in Mexico. And so I think our pride in country, I think he brought that with him, his pride in Mexico, and then he became naturalized here, and his pride in the United States, never forgetting Mexico. And he raised my father that way, and the U.S. patriot that he was.
Right.
He's gone now, but he instilled that in us, and I think it just continues. It becomes part of, so far, it's what it's been. I had a scholarship. I wasn't ready for college, much like Ben. I knew myself at that point, and there were other things going on in the world. In fact, soon after I joined, our forces were bombed in Beirut. And so as a matter of an understanding, I think our reasons for when we go in, there's always that in the forefront, or at least the middle of your mind that, that this could mean something that you're not ready for at that point. But it shifts after you've joined. You become part of something bigger than yourself, and you realize it. And I think, like Robert mentioned earlier, everyone around us are veterans, and I think we kind of gravitate to each other. We can recognize each other in public, just the way a man or woman carries themselves, the way they respond to you, the way there's something about us. The change, the Marine Corps coined the phrase, the change is permanent. I think that happens in all the branches, and it's really that why is hard to pinpoint sometimes.
Right.
So.
Let me add one thing. You brought up a good point. My grandfather also, Enrique Hernandez, fought in Mexico. He was with Pancho Villa, who was a capitan, age 14. I forgot that. And we have his discharge paper signed by Francisco Villa. One of the things I want to point out is if you look at our covers here, our caps, you'll see it's 41. 41 is fondly referred to as a Mexican post in Arizona.
Yeah.
So they took on different issues at the time when they came out of World War II, and we were helped by another post, Post 1, and we were able to concentrate on those efforts now as the American Legion and as Post 41 and finally referred to as a Mexican post. We're concentrated on a number of programs that the American Legion has.
Real quick, we have to go on our break. The post, I mean, I was just at Post 41 this week, and I told my wife, you know what, it just clicked. A post is basically almost like it gives you the sense that you're there with your group when you were. Is that the sense? I kind of sense some of that. Yeah. Post. Why do they call it post? You know, what is it? And even in Spanish, I try to grab the concept, and it's basically that, right? You are with your own people that serve, and you still kind of feed on that good experiences or even support, if you will. Right?
Well, once again, it's a group of veterans that get together.
Right.
You know, we've been asked before, you have to be Hispanic to get into your post. We go, no, we don't play that game. You know,
Good.
It's wide open. You know,
you are amazing, and we have to go on our last break. Stay with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, addressing today the VA, its history, benefits, and resources. And we only have one more segment. It's going to go fast, so let's go to the subject. So when somebody serves and comes back to civilian life, I've been educated by Robert. You and I spent a good, almost like half a day, a few hours one time.
Right.
And there are veterans organizations, correct? And there are three: the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, and then the Disabled American Veterans. I understand that you all belong to the American Legion, correct?
I belong to all three of them.
Oh, you belong to all three, so it is possible to belong to all three. Can you help us, Commander Robert, to understand how the American Legion is structured?
The American Legion, all three organizations have their requirements for eligibility to join. The American Legion is referred to as a war veterans organization. There are periods of conflict or war that you have to have participated in or served in by one day at least before you can join the American Legion. Within the American Legion, the national office is up in Indianapolis, and from there goes down to the various states. I forget there's how many, Angel?
55.
55, yeah, I read that.
Because there's also some in Mexico.
Yeah,
Correct.
Puerto Rico.
there, yeah, and we have the France post and
right, and so from there it breaks down to areas. From the areas goes to the districts. From the districts goes to the post, which as I was referring to earlier. We're from Post 41 currently, and there are commanders at each level. And there are organizations within them to support a lot of the programs that the American Legion has, which include Boys State, American Legion Law Enforcement's Career Academy, Operation Comfort Warriors. There's scholarships. There's a number of programs that are too numerous to mention. The other organizations also have their programs, but I'm more familiar with the American Legion.
American Legion, of course.
Yeah.
So you have this national, and then you come to the areas where you come to the states. Each state is referred to as a department, right?
correct.
Each
It's
department
and area.
An area, right? And then each department or area has districts, and Post 41 happens to belong to District 12, correct? And so you are a District 12 commander. And you are at what? You are the state?
I'm at department, yes.
At the
state.
department level, and then you are a historian both at the department
and
level
the post.
and at the post.
Right.
What happens in post 41? I understand there's a side two, and I don't know where this falls. If it falls in, I assume it falls into the American Legion structure, where women play an amazing role, and not necessarily that they is that what it's called, the auxiliary?
The auxiliary.
Yeah. Can you just briefly say a little something about that?
Well, not long after the American Legion was chartered, the American Legion Auxiliary was chartered as a separate organization, but directly supportive of all of our aims and our ideals and the things that we want to do in our community. And I'll keep mentioning, I really want to get this into the minds of people. We are members of our community who happen to be veterans, and there are women in our community who happen to become veterans as well. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't, and some are women who are veterans also join the auxiliary simply because it's another opportunity to serve. But basically, as a family unit, when you start combining our sons of the American Legion and we form programs, there's too many to list. One of the biggest and most visible are the American Legion Riders, as an example. You can do probably a whole show on that kind of thing, David. But the women that form their programs to support what the Post does, it's integral. There's no way that I could do what I do without the support of my wife. And many of us rely on the auxiliaries in our posts and at the various levels to help support and actually drive some unique programs of their own, but they're still parallel with our four pillars.
Commander Ben, you were telling us off the air of your experience culture-wise. Let's talk about a little bit of culture, brief. You are of Mexican descent, so you have your Mexican culture. Then now you come to this army. What happens internally, and then when you get out, are you still able to just conduct yourself as a Mexican, or you have some restrictions there? Kind of paint us a quick picture, please.
Okay, so as we discussed earlier, joining the military, when you're in a military setting, they take away your ability to speak Spanish, or we call it our foreign tongue, because English is the language.
Okay.
And you have to abide by those rules. But my first unit that we talked about, I was stationed in Camp Pendleton, California, and my platoon was all Mexicanos, and majority of them were from Tucson, Arizona, and the rest were from, not Tucson, but from various parts of Arizona, and the other part were from California. So the Californians came from communities that were heavily gang infested, or something to that nature, and they were of poverty individuals. And in Arizona, they were for all border towns, and some from the South Central Phoenix and
Miami
and in Tucson, and so they too had that kind of background of hardship. But California and Arizona seeing two different ways of seeing things as a Mexicano. But because we couldn't act as Mexicans during our normal day, when it came down for our meal times, we'd sit down at a table and we'd all have our meals there. One person from Arizona would break out a bottle of salsa from Arizona, and the guy from California would break out tortillas, and we'd break bread together, as you call it. And so we went back to our culture for that 30 minutes or whatever we had to eat, and then after that, we were gone.
Yeah, just briefly, because of time. So how about when you came back from the military? Especially if you make a career, you're kind of formed, you're kind of shaped as a military person. Now you go to culture. How do you handle culture?
It's difficult.
Are you restricted?
Well, you're restricted during the time you're sitting in uniform, but once you get into your own home and you shut the door, all bets are off.
Okay. How about you, Angel? Real quick.
It's much the same. My parents raised me trying to make sure that we protected the language of our youth, and yet to do so as an American, the culture stays with you, I believe. And if you ever forget it, somewhere along the way, I think it happens with many other cultures, when there was discussion about sending people into Panama, they were looking for linguists, looking to form linguists, if you could speak Spanish. And so, they see, and we're not allowed to, but if they need us to speak it, then we're allowed. It now becomes orders, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing. You know, I was brought up and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona, down the street from the post. And I had mentioned before, one of the unity things that we have with Post 41 is that we're all veterans, we all serve, we all have that experience, but many of us grew up together. So you go out, you branch out, you do what you do, you come back and back home again.
Right.
And that we never lose that.
Now, the concept of acculturation, let me use that word, acculturation, I believe it has to do with understanding this country, embracing values, et cetera, understanding its history. Does the military service kind of influence you to kind of get acculturated like in a hurry? Is learning everything they have to learn about the history, the doctrine of each branch of the government? Does that help you or somewhat shapes you more in the American culture?
For my part, it did, because it does create a new culture, and you're part of, and that we're all the same. We all bleed the same. We all wear the same uniform. We all walk the same. Everything. The outpouring of that when you come back out as a veteran, back into your community, lends itself to the things that we do, like the American Legion, trying to make inroads into helping to do something for our the Mexicans who serve in the military for the United States and who haven't gotten their citizenship. The things like the medical care that they're receiving right now while they've been deported, all the various abilities that we have to help immigrants legally obtain citizenship. All these things become part of it, and in our post in particular, right in the middle of our neighborhood, like Robert mentioned, it's who we are before we join, and we continue to serve that way.
Let me ask each one of you to tell the young people who could be listening why joining the military is a good idea.
Well, as I said earlier, it gave me the opportunity to get into a good career field. I was a jet engine technician, which opened the door for me when I got out and went to work for Lockheed Aircraft Service out at Luke as an aircraft mechanic, which helped me, and it goes on and on and on. And it first was rooted with the military. I had to have discipline. I had to pass a lot of tests, and it structured me in that sense, so I was able to continue.
Thank you.
Very fortunate. The military is a great asset in learning experience, receiving an education, being able to see the world. But most of all, it preps you for when you do decide to get out. You can either make it a career or not a career, but if you do it correctly, there's great opportunities available to you if you take advantage.
Right.
And I would simply add or keep it overall, I would ask you to pray about it and to sit down with the people in your world that love you and that are going to be affected by you going away to do this new part in your life. But absolutely in prayer, I think you'll understand what it is that you want and need and how you're serving, and you'll find those answers there with your loved ones.
Last question in just a few words. Do you think that your culture and family life makes it easier when you have to come back to civilian life after going away? It's helpful, and it helps you to kind of make the transition better real quick.
Yes, mine did.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I want to thank you once again for your service and for making time to join this show. This is the second show that we've done on the VA. We did one strictly on Post 41.
Correct.
But I can tell you this is not going to be the last. So thank you to all of you who joined this show today. We really hope that you enjoyed it. It was the history of benefits and resources of the VA, and this was AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Have a great week.